All you need is love, except, you know, when you don't want it. So this is just a video that kind of popped into my head to do, because on Twitter somebody kind of asked me about shipping. Like, I think they might have asked specifically who I shipped in something. I can't remember, and I've never really talked too much about shipping, and I'm not really a shipper. Just in case for some reason you're not familiar with the terminology, shipping, ship is short for relationship, and shipping is the practice of fans to strongly desire that specific characters within a TV show, movie, comic book, franchise, whatever, would become romantically entangled. And shippers are the people who engage in this. And it is kind of an interesting bit of like subculture within, you know, it's not even limited to geek circles, in fandom in general. People who really sort of get excited at the possibilities of who could pair up and who would be best for who. And yeah, when I say I'm not a shipper, I want to be really clear. I don't disparage shippers. However you engage in your fandom of something, if that includes shipping, awesome, cool. And I also want to be clear, I'm not completely above shipping. It's not like I've never done it before. Like, off the top of my head, the two that I would come up with that, yeah, I shipped that, would be something like the Justice League cartoon. I do ship Batman and Wonder Woman, and which is implied and never made explicit, which I love. And before they went there in Gotham, spoilers for season 3? Yes, it was season 3 that it happened. I shipped Ed and Oswald, like, hard. Like, as soon as I saw those two in a scene together, I'm like, oh God, please. And like, but the thing is that those are kind of the only examples I can come up with off the top of my head, because fundamentally that's not me. And again, not disparaging it, but the simple truth is I am somebody who would remove forcibly, with pliers and a crowbar if necessary, the romantic subplots from probably 90% of all media. And it's not because I hate romance. I don't. It's because I hate seeing a romantic subplot shoved in where it doesn't enhance anything, where it doesn't help, where it drags things down, where it diverges from why I'm here. And since I'm not a shipper, when those characters start hooking up, you know, that's not what I'm here for, so I get annoyed by it. So I'm trying to think of some good go-to examples, because there are some things that have a romantic subplot basically baked into the DNA of it. Like, I don't get hung up on it with James Bond films. Although, I mean, part of that is with the possible exception of Ava Green's character in Casino Royale. They've never really tried to pull a whole and he's in love with this woman thing, which helps. Because that's part of the thing. It's the heavy leaning on it. Like, I was resistant for a while on the Fry and Leela thing. I liked it much better as an unrequited affection. Eventually that did pan out and that did work. Oh, here's a real good example. Highlander, the original Highlander, as far as I'm concerned, the only Highlander. TV show was okay, but I never got into it. But in that original film, there is an awesome love story between the main character, Connor MacLeod, and his wife in Scotland. I think everyone knows what Highlander is, but just in case you don't, I'll be super quick. He is part of a race of immortals. He figures that out, and part of that is he can't have kids. So, you know, this woman that he loves, he's going to stay young. She's going to die. She's going to get old and die. But it's very core to understanding who Connor is as a person. It's also to the tune of Queen's Who Wants to Live Forever, written for the movie. there's a glorious, wonderful montage of her getting older and him never stopping loving her, and ending with him holding this frail old woman in his arms and looking down at her and with the same look as if he was seeing her in her 20s, just as beautiful as she ever was to him. And it's awesome and it's wonderful and amazing. And then later on in the same movie, they decide to have him hook up with a police investigator who is onto him, and it's stupid and clunky and comes out of nowhere and gives us an awkward sex scene and doesn't do anything to benefit the story. She ends up being a damsel in distress, but even that is unnecessary. There's a ton of stuff baked into the narrative that is a reason for the final showdown between Connor and the Kurgan, who's the villain. You don't need to force him into this situation by giving him a new love interest. He has a ton of reasons to face this guy down already. We don't need that too. So that's that little mini ramble I just went on. That's a good example of how I feel about the vast majority of romantic subplots in film, television, comic books. And in some ways, I find it more aggravating in movies than I do in TV and comics, although it does bug me there too. I think my issue with romantic subplots in movies where the romance is not central to the characters or the premise, it's just kind of there, is what drives me crazy about that is when you make a movie, you've got a limited amount of time. You've got 90 minutes to 2.5 hours, unless you're being stupidly indulgent. To lose time away from whatever the thing is about in order to do a romantic subplot, I hate that. I like I said, I would carve this stuff out with a rusty butter knife if I could. It just drives me up the wall. It does still bother me on TV shows. It bothers me a little bit less because I do know that part of the reason TV shows have a tendency to ship is that the longer something runs, eventually you're just looking for more opportunities to feed the story. Unless you're telling a story that has a really clear final destination, something like, I don't know, Breaking Bad, then eventually you're going to hit a point in the series of just, we have to fill a season of television again this year. And part of how you fill the time is with more subplots. What's an easy subplot? Well, let's have two characters get together. That'll get us another 5 minutes per episode. That's easily taken care of. It can get a focus in one episode and be half of that. Great. So now we filled some time. So I do understand that the necessity, especially in American television, the necessity to fill time. Because American TV shows, especially network ones, 20 plus episodes a season, yeah, they need stuff to do, and that theoretically gives you story possibilities. So I get slightly less annoyed by it in TV shows, because when it happens in TV shows, it feels more like an inevitability, like we're at that point in the show's run. Gotcha. Where whatever the core premise of the thing isn't carrying the full weight of a season worth of stories anymore, and we need to add more stuff in. I got it. That's where we are. And that's where you tend to get, various ships and hookups between characters on TV shows, where it wasn't part of the initial core setup of the story and the dynamic between the characters. You get those developed relationships, the ones that are more likely to annoy me. Usually 3 seasons in, I'd say on average, is when you start really getting those in a lot of shows. And yeah, that, again, it wouldn't bother me, but I feel like the romantic subplots are so often totally detached and detachable from the stories. Like, you could remove it and almost nothing else changes. Like, you'd change a little bit of dialogue. You maybe remove one scene that they have together, but then the overall story, and more primarily the plot that is the main thrust of whatever it is, whatever show, movie, comic it is unaltered. And that, to me, is something that is a distraction. And that's how I feel about the vast majority of romantic subplots. Now, when romance is central to what you're doing, I can appreciate that. I'm not sure there's any TV shows that I've really watched where that's the case. But, well, you know what? I suppose Brooklyn Nine-Nine. I was initially resisting of Amy and Jake hooking up. But eventually I warmed to that because that started heading that way in the first season. So this was obviously early plans. This wasn't something done out of desperation. And the way that relationship has developed over the course of the show very obviously had some thought put into it. Because otherwise what you frequently run into is the thing that I talked about when I talked about comic book tropes that I hate, which is that no one's allowed to stay happy for very long. And that's the other thing that's really aggravating about a lot of these ships, especially on TV, which is that when a couple of characters get together, like, great, they're going to be happy for maybe the remainder of the season, and then something's going to go horribly wrong next year. Because it has to. Because if they're happy, there's less tension, there's less conflict, there's less drama, there's less story possibilities. And so that's the other thing that really that is sort of specific to the television and comic book version of these things, is you see two characters get together and I immediately think, well, if they're not planning to end this thing anytime soon, that's on borrowed time. It was one of the things that really bugged me about House, which was a show I liked a lot. It became increasingly I was going to say increasingly formulaic. It was formulaic from the beginning, but the formula was starting to wear thin. I think season 4 was the best season personally. I don't know if I'm alone in that, but after that, it started to really get a bit repetitive. And one of the things they had a tendency to do was to have various characters start being together. Various doctors on his team. They did it with several of them. And then eventually, season 6, I think it was the very end of season 5, they had House hook up with his boss. Whatever it was. So, second to last season was where the relationship played out. And the finale from the season before, I forget how many seasons there were. Were there 7 or were there 8? I don't know. But when he and Cuddy started hooking up, my immediate thought was, next year needs to be the last season, because this will not be allowed to stand. Too much of House's characterization is dependent on him being miserable. And if the next season is the last season, then maybe he can have this and we'll wrap everything up. Maybe they can sustain this for a season, but they won't be able to sustain it past that. But the next season wasn't the last season, and that entire thing blew up, and then Cuddy didn't even appear in the season that followed. She was written out of the show. And I don't know if that was because Lisa Edelson didn't want to come back. Maybe it was, but I mean, they also had exhausted any possibilities for the character. They completely used her up, and she was a great character. So that's sort of my ramble and my issues with romantic subplots, and why I am not, and I don't think will ever really consider myself to be a shipper, even though every now and then I'll be like, maybe those two. So I don't want to ask for people's thoughts on shipping in general, because I think then we'll just get into a debate of, shipping's stupid, or shipping's great, or whatever. But is there a romantic subplot that particularly annoyed you? Was there one that you wanted to see happen that didn't? Whatever your thoughts are along those lines, or about anything else that I've said, please keep it respectful. Drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. There's also a whole bunch of buttons down there, including a link to the Patreon. Check them out if you feel like it. They take you places. And just remember, folks, you're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.